Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be about Avatar Legends Realms Collide, and specifically what I want to do today is I want to talk about Ark Saga, the story mode in Realms Collide. So I talked about in one of my last news update videos that this was added into the game. It was kind of almost a surprise thing because it came out of nowhere, and I think especially after having played through the stuff that's in there now, it seems crazy to me that this was not in there at launch, and it seemed to almost take the community manager by surprise that it was in the update, like, at all. So it's a weird one where, like, this was not really one of the most heavily marketed kind of parts of updates and stuff like that, but actually this is where effectively all of the story content in the game actually is. So if we just kind of go into this and see how it's all laid out, I think I've played through everything I have access to at the moment. This is the only menu I can really go into. I've played through everything that there is. Episode 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm assuming there's more because the story definitely doesn't end with 4-4. There's definitely still more to come. I'm guessing as your world server or whatever progresses through the kind of main story, this will gradually unlock, is my guess. But it seems like this is kind of a little bit behind, like, versus where other people are. So I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one. It's not the most clear thing in the world when more is actually coming. I think there definitely should be something here in the game to say when more is coming. But this is actually a decent chunk of story content. Like, if you go through this here, like, some of them have like 6, some of them have 5, and the last one has 4. So there's a good like 20 something of these, and each one of these things, there's not much gameplay in it, but it's at least a couple of minutes of clicking through dialogue between the new characters. And at least some of them have relatively significant background information on the game that is obviously not really present anywhere else in the game. I think it takes a little bit to get going when it's just the main two characters, Kenshi and Fian. Just like, you know, it's banter, it's fine, but there's not much there. But then, like, when you get towards the end here, especially more towards the end, like, and they introduce the other Shattered Skull, the first Shattered Skulls member, the unique character, like Togrul, it gets a bit more interesting because they finally go into, like, the lore aspect of things. I still think it's an incredibly confusing situation that this game has with its story, where this is a complete non-canon story. But this story, as presented so far, does not use any of the... Like, there's no need, in a way, in my mind, for it to be non-canon, because they just don't set it anywhere. But they also don't use the other characters. Like, you don't see the characters interacting with Zuko, Tenzin, Aang, any of the other avatars. It is purely all new characters. It's Kenshi and Fian interacting with Shattered Skulls members, and then your character, the quote-unquote leader, is with the group with Kenshi and Fian. But this is this undefined leader character, not one of the actual main characters. Sure, you still use your known characters in the few story fights that there are, but there's no story mention of who you chose or anything like that, to the point where it is just like these characters are roughly in control of an army. So I think if they really, really wanted to, could have just chosen to set this in a different era and go with it in that way. Because Father Glowworm is the only previously known character that actually gets mentioned here. Yes, there are some place names that gets mentioned, especially the Siwang Desert, and they allude to a few other things. There are mentions of tribes, a bunch of different tribes in the Siwang Desert as you go through this. Now, that's a little bit unclear because all we know is the Sandbenders, kind of canonically really from the show, but like, is there these other ones as well, or is that purely as part of this non-canon story? But so far, to me, there's nothing in these that is inherently contradictory to, like, kind of everything else going on. The only thing is, I suppose, the fact that they maybe are doing relatively big things with the Siwang Desert, in terms of what the plans, I guess, are going forward. But still, it's just an odd one where it just doesn't use the franchise in the non-canon way you expect it to, which is that these characters should be interacting with Zuko, King Kuei, all the characters you can play as. If they don't, none of them appear. It's just completely the original characters. to the point where, like, no one ever mentions the idea that, like, the eras have collided and there's multiple avatars. I don't think the avatar really even gets mentioned as part of the story at all here. Though admittedly, as of the first 4 episodes, we haven't really got into the whole too much on Glowworm, too much on Shanyu, which would be the character where we would need the avatar to kind of face off against. But still, it's so odd the way they do it. Let me open up one of the ones that I think is the most interesting in terms of actually showing you what the story is. So when you get to episode 3, High Priestess, so this is obviously about Borte, and I'll do stage 2. So there's all of stage 1 is about, like, Borte, like, with her followers outside. She's going in to negotiate with our new characters here. And so this is kind of when we get down to business here. We're having tea with her because all the Shattered Skulls members want to have tea and talk over things. A lot of negotiations happening, basically. So yeah, that's what's going on here. So all this stuff is perfectly fine here. Just this kind of standard kind of banter kind of back and forth. I get to talking about these two characters a little bit more in a second. But I want to, get through to some of the plot beats, I suppose, so we have some stuff to discuss. So she talks about Togrul and stuff like that. The fundamental plot here is that we are trying to basically take out the Shattered Skulls by kind of undermining them from within. So we find out that a lot of the Shattered Skulls have their own kind of motives. They're not inherently loyal to the Shattered Skulls, but this is the chapter that basically explains why, even though they're not super connected, why they still go along with this, and they're being quite careful about how they go about breaking up the Shattered Skulls. They're all aware it's kind of evil, but what's the correct way to do it because of what has happened? So Borte, of course, is the High Priestess, and we get some details on that. Like, she talks directly here about, this is the plan, I know this is what your plan is, and so she does reveal that she's on board with this, basically, in just a second. So you came here to stop us? No, I support your plan. I respect it. It reminds me of, and this is interesting as well, it reminds me of the panda lilies back home. What? I grew up in a small village at the base of a volcano. Our only source of income was selling the rare panda lilies that grew on the mountain's peak. That's the fortune teller, isn't it? Panda lilies, we go up there. That's part of the culture of Makapus to get those panda lilies, which grow up near a volcano. They never say Makapu, but I'm guessing it's either Makapu or somewhere nearby that has the same kind of climate where these would grow on volcanoes, which is kind of interesting. Again, because it's more, I suppose, Siwang desert stuff, maybe it's a little bit further out, but same idea kind of going on here, which is quite clever with the world building overall. But yeah, they weren't rich, but it was okay. Then the desert began to change. The corruption spread to our village. The panda lilies died. What's that got to do with anything? Things were bad. They were desperate. But then the Shattered Skulls arrived. So they came in, and the whole premise is that the Shattered Skulls have united the different tribes of the Siwang Desert. So this is what she's kind of pointing out here. They put people to work. They brought food and purpose in their time of need. All of a sudden, this kind of disastrous kind of system where the tribes were all fending for themselves in an environment that's not easy to live off, the Shattered Skulls allowed them to do that. Admittedly, you had to join basically Father Glowworm's cult, of course, as they kind of point out here. Are you saying it's okay just because your lives got better, but you have to sacrifice people to Glowworm? And we get to the idea. Things changed. The chaos that came with the loss of Firelilies was replaced by a new order. Are you ready to handle the chaos that will come when the Shattered Skulls disappear? As in, if you just break it apart and leave it, you have just created a worse situation, because people are used to a certain amount of order now, and you will break that apart. So you have to defeat the Shattered Skulls in a specific way so that the people of the desert will be in a good spot, basically, coming afterwards. That's the idea here. So, liberate the tribes. It's just a fearless joke. They like the stability they have, but they don't like the sacrifices, is the idea. Life before in the Siwang Desert was kind of bad. Constant fighting and warfare between the tribes. So what do? No, the current Shattered Skulls have crossed the line. That's why I'm going to help you. What's the plan then? She's not just going to be the High Priestess anymore. She's going to be the Queen of the Shattered Skulls. So we begin to get this idea for Borte that what she actually wants to do is that she wants to become the real, I suppose, more reasonable leader of the Shattered Skulls. That she still wants to, I suppose, get rid of the evil core of what it is. But the idea of the tribes all being united for a single purpose is good. And she wants to kind of take over that. She does want power. I think in one of the later chapters she reveals that, yes, she absolutely still wants the power and stuff like that. But she does honestly care about the people being in a better spot. So that's the interesting stuff. She's going to stop the human sacrifices. No more offerings to that one-eyed spirit. Now, admittedly, they don't really get to talking about this idea. They're very much focused so far on the idea of like how do we actually defeat the Shattered Skulls in the first place. And it's like, okay, we need to unite a lot of the other kind of captains and stuff like that to eventually target Fuzhi, who is the kind of specific captain who kind of guards Morong. But if you attack Fuzhi, you'll bring Morong, who has most of the army of the Shattered Skulls under his control. And he has a giant army, and that's a risk. So you have to be careful with how you do that. Borte is planning to kind of reveal her betrayal, in that she has so many fanatics that follow her as the priestess that she will support you in fighting Morong. But then Lushan, one of the other members, has a specific vendetta against Morong because Morong killed his father, the chief of one of the other tribes. Again, Chanyu and Morong are from the Kiat tribe, and then there's, I think they say it was the Shan tribe that Lushan is from. And they're not really talking much about Chanyu. They introduce him towards the end. They don't cover the whole he's possessed by glowworm situation, that he's incredibly powerful, that you will need, like, effectively probably an avatar to deal with him. They don't address that yet. In addition to the idea of, even if you defeat Chanyu, how do you then defeat glowworm just by himself? That idea. Yeah, so glowworm, the bloodthirsty spirit, who changed the Siwang Desert in exchange for human sacrifices. So that's the whole thing here. The map of the game apparently is actually the Siwang Desert, just altered by glowworm because he is being empowered by people giving human sacrifices to him. That's interesting. I don't think anyone particularly called that because it looks so different. It looks like just a generic map, but they seem to be highlighting the idea here of, well, this is what we need to kind of make happen. Now that glowworm has changed the desert, we need to kind of end things in a way that, like, okay, keeps things as they are, but doesn't revert them back completely to the way they were. So, you know, if we stop the human sacrifices, what will hold the people together? There'll be chaos. I'll give the people an anchor. She's going to establish, like, I suppose, a proper, legitimate group, the Shattered Skulls. Probably need a name change. So that's the whole situation there. But yeah, how do you plan on becoming queen? Simple, attack Fuzhi. And this is where they get into that political stuff, which is what most of the other chapters are about. You go to meet Togrul. He tells you to basically go meet Lushan. Lushan doesn't want anything to do with you. Then Borte kind of comes into play. And you're kind of roughly trying to play them all against each other because can you trust any of them? And there's some twists and turns along the way. It's an interesting one. I think there's a lot of dialogue that you're just clicking through, like, yeah, gotcha, yeah, nothing really to talk about here. But then all of a sudden, it will just suddenly turn on and it'll be like, oh, here's the really interesting lore details. Like, say, this chapter you read in a lot of detail because it's like the entire plot, it's the entire premise kind of coming up. Or certain other chapters, you're just like, yeah, gotcha, we're going to go over here and we're just discussing it in great detail. These two have a bit of an argument and that's it. Like, there is a bit of a gulf between the best stuff and most of this stuff. But it's worth kind of going through, I would say. There's enough here that it's interesting enough, I think. So yeah, Morong's going to get involved eventually, but she's going to get involved as well. But that's the whole situation there. I think that there's potential. It's doing more than I expected. And I think people have a bad view on the story just because the game launched with no story. but it's just all in this mode. And I would say one thing that I definitely come out of this feeling is that the game has the potential to do story content. They can have the models on screen with text. They at certain points, they do cut to kind of pieces of art representing more of a piece in the story, like they did in the Kyoshi update in Generations. So I'm kind of like, when you maybe do get around to doing Kyoshi characters, can you actually just do a Rise of Kyoshi update kind of like Generations was doing, and you do it in this style and you get introduced to those characters, and you maybe just have a canon adaptation of the novels in this as well? Because I can absolutely see the idea if you open up Ark Saga and you choose the main story, the Kyoshi story, maybe the Yang Chen story, you know, depending on what way they're doing it, like that could be kind of interesting. You know, if they're going to maybe introduce comic characters, maybe you can do something with the comics and kind of show them off in some sort of a way like that. I think the game needs to lean into this a little bit more ultimately. Get the characters across, because I think once you go through this and you read some of this stuff, all of a sudden Borte goes from being random character who kind of has an interesting design to actually she's kind of a fun character where she's completely acting like the loyal priestess of the Shattered Skulls, but she's actually this almost like trollish character who wants to be the queen, not under the Shattered Skulls, but like her own thing. It's kind of interesting. So that's that. But yeah, that's that situation here, and she moves off. We set up what we want to do next, dealing with like a lot of the other characters. There's more twists and turns, of course, with regards to basically the politics of the situation. Getting into these two, I suppose, a little bit, because they are our main characters for this. These are the two characters that your leader character has chosen to be part of their main kind of group. Apparently, they're both master benders. They're both, you know, one's a water bender, one's a fire bender. They are kind of quirky characters because Fian here is actually super strong, but she's a little bit clumsy. She is a very skilled waterbender. She's also a hunter, so she does have good senses. It's just her general personality gives off the impression that she maybe isn't that skilled, but once she settles down and focuses, she is actually very, very strong. So she's a unique character, certainly. I think she stands out. Kenshi is interesting. He's a lot more kind of serious. He's more of the Fian, you know, get it together type thing. But as we see, he has a bit of an interesting thing with his own firebending, where he kind of has the Kyoshi thing going on, where they say he can't gently firebend. He can only do big firebending. There's one point in the story where Fian asks him to light up their kind of campfire, and she kind of has to force him almost to do it. He doesn't really want to, but when he does, he just does this giant attack that basically incinerates the whole thing, and he reveals that like he can't do kind of subtle firebending. He can only do big firebending. And this plays into part of his character, which is that he's very kind of fearful of firebending. He's grown up with the idea of you have to be so careful with firebending. Firebending is dangerous. So he doesn't do it that much. He only does it when he has to. And the two of them seem sort of at odds over that, because she's aware that bending can be dangerous, but like he's maybe taking it to an extreme. But then he also has this kind of issue with his bending where like it is more dangerous for him overall, which is kind of interesting. But then in other scenes, like you very much get the idea that like these two go from kind of being introduced, kind of having to team up for this to I think there is a bit of a romance developing. I don't think it's just friendship. I think they're definitely leading towards romance, because there is a point where like I think she asked him to do something. He kind of is about to fall over. She grabs him, and because she is part of her character is that she's actually really, really strong, she's the one holding him up, and they kind of have a bit of an awkward moment. There's another moment where I think she's making some sort of food, and he doesn't initially want to try it, but he does, and he actually ends up liking it, and they kind of have a moment there as well. They do bicker a lot. There's a lot of arguments because they are kind of different kind of types of characters, but it's nice enough. I think it is on par, I think, with some of the stuff they did with like some of the newer characters in Generations. And it's so crazy, like, that this game, I just, like, my initial thoughts after the first week or so of the game was that there's no story here. Like, why should I care? This story mode actually, like, brings a lot of stuff into play. Again, I think it's all undercut by the fact that the game is non-canon, so it's hard to get super invested, but hey, there is a story here, and it's sort of interesting. I don't know, I'm interested to follow it and see how it goes on. I do think they need to communicate better what the situation is with, like, when is the other stuff coming? Like, how much story is there? Is there a plan to use this to do more stuff? But I think it's really good that the game has this now. And it gives me a little bit of hope that stuff is actually going to happen. And you can also look at, like, the dialogue here. Like, you can actually just scroll back through it all, which is kind of cool, just to kind of highlight it. Which is, I think, kind of nice, just that we have that. Like, unlike Generations, where I think a lot of the story stuff was kind of, you play through it once, you see it once, and that's really it. This is just fully replayable. So that's that. And again, that one is on the longer side of things. Some of them are more transitional, where, like, literally I think stage 3 is just, what should we say in our letter to Togrul? This is what we should say in our letter to Togrul. Let's send a letter to Togrul. Oh. And there is that kind of contrast between, some of them feel very notable, other ones you are just like, yeah, let's get through this. There's nothing going on here. Sometimes it feels like it's spinning its wheels a little bit, but there is some decent stuff here. Like, you do see some visuals on the different fortresses for the different characters. I think this one shows you a little bit of kind of the dynamic between the main characters here. So yeah, the leader goes away, so it leaves these two kind of on their own, and they do have, I think, a little bit of a moment here. Oh, is this the carry scene? I think that this is, yeah, I think this is what it is. Yeah, she asked him to carry the big bag. He nearly falls over, and we get the kind of story moment, and it's kind of fun. I'm not kidding. You can do this. Use your core. I'll carry it. Wait, and he falls over. Watch out. And then you get the, kind of like Generations did, you get the kind of story moment kind of bit where she catches him and she's the one holding him like this in a kind of reversal on what you typically expect. And it's like, okay, there's something. These two do have a bit of a kind of connection here going on. So there's that. If you got hurt, I'd be really sad. ... It's interesting. So I think that's most of what I want to say, because, like, I don't think it's maybe worth doing a full deep dive necessarily, just because it is specifically all stated to be non-canon. I suppose it's quote-unquote canon to its own Realms Collide kind of continuity, but, like, it's non-canon to the other material. But like I said, I've not talked about any other characters except, like, Fionn, Kenshi, the leader, and the Shattered Skulls characters, because none of them have been introduced into it. I don't know if they ever will be or anything like that, because there is a little bit of lack of clarity about, like, you know, the leader, is that me? And, like, because I chose Air, was that Tenzin? And that makes it non-canon then, because it's very clear that this is not just the Korra world or anything like that. So, interesting. So, gonna wrap it up there. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. Have you gone through the Ark Saga story mode for Realms Collide? What do you think of the story and some of the character stuff that they're doing here now that they've introduced it? Do you agree with me that the door probably is a little bit open now to them maybe doing stuff with those other unique eras, like, say, the Kyoshi era, that maybe they can do a bit of a big event that includes story content to introduce those characters? Because there's maybe going to be a little bit of a thing where, like, if they just, like, say, introduce, like, Rangi or even some of the lesser known characters from the novels, Are a lot of the people who play this game going to know who they are without story content to say who they are? That, like, are we assuming that everyone playing this game is a hardcore fan who has read the novels? I don't think you can make that assumption. So I think they have to have some accompanying content with that. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Otherwise, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.